A Heroine's Beginning, Chapter 15. The next morning, I was rudely awakened by a small shape bouncing up and down on top of my legs. My eyes opened slowly, and saw the light brown curls of Gwyn. "Gwyn, stop that!" I cried. She came to a halt and tried to pull off my legs, which she was uncomfortably leaning on.
"Marion, what happened? The ball! What happened at the ball?"
Her high-pitched voice reaching my ears, painfully loud. "I'll tell you later. Come on, up you get," I said to her, lifting her down off my bed and rolling out myself. As I stood up, I glanced at the dress that was hanging over the back of the wooden chair in the room. My emerald ball gown reminded me of the previous night, and it brought a smile to my face. But unfortunately, it was now back to the normal daily grind that was my life. I dressed and started in the kitchen, making my usual pot of porridge for all of us. Sunlight was just beginning to pour in through the small window, illuminating everything in a layer of gold. I started to hum a melody of one of the songs from last night, a minuet, I believe. As I stirred the porridge on the stove, I began to sway in time with the dance. I suppose the golden light reminded me of the candlelight of the ball, and the shade of Ella's dress. As the melody grew, I moved away from the stove and began to dance around the room. To anyone looking in on me, I would have looked completely mad, parading around the room with a wooden spoon in my hand, humming loudly. At one point, I actually turned to my spoon and thanked it for the dance. I was snapped out of my daze by the smell of burning oats, and frantically ran over to the stove to remove the burning pan. Thankfully, only a small portion was burnt, and the rest was still edible. I quickly dished up breakfast into the 9 bowls on the table and called everyone in. As usual, Gwyn and Robbie were the first sitting down. Most likely they had been awake for a good while already. Then Father, Alexander, Tom, and Daniel came and took their place. Richard and Clara had always liked to sleep as late as possible. Alexander left the table to go and drag them out of bed. Gwyn started up with trying to get me to tell them about the ball. Once Clara joined the table, still in her nightclothes, there was no escaping telling the story, but I truly did not mind. I did, after all, love stories, and so I told them every single thing that happened at the ball. Well, almost everything. I kept Ella's identity secret. I figured that if Ella wanted to stay anonymous, there was very little chance it would remain that way if any of my siblings knew. They did all love to talk very much. So I told them about the Golden Princess, as if I only knew as much as everyone else at the ball. Clara and Gwyn, I was surprised to discover, did not have the most questions for me like I expected. It was Father, and most of the questions revolved around Lord James. I tried to answer as many questions as I was able, and purposely avoided questions about whether or not I was going to see him again, and what exactly his intentions were when he asked me to dance, and many other questions similar to this. I managed to avoid him slightly when the meal was finished, and I moved the bowls into the sink. I began adding water and soap and started to scrub the bowls and spoons. My embarrassment was ended when Alexander opened the door and announced it was time for him and Father to leave, or they were going to be late for work. My father gave me a quick peck on the cheek and wished me a good day, and that he would get some answers to his questions. They both walked out of the door, and I began to make preparations for my trip to the market. I should have been going in 2 days, but due to mine and Clara's isolation fitting everyone's dress for the ball, my brothers had taken it upon themselves to try cooking, rather than face starvation. As a consequence of this, much of the food that I was planning to make into meals either ended up on the floor or got burnt to a crisp. So I had to make an impromptu trip to the market to restock our supplies. By the time I got to the marketplace, after visiting my mother's grave, the place was already buzzing with people. The only topic of conversation was last night's events, with whispers of the Golden Princess on everyone's lips. I found it rather amusing that no one else knew who she was. I went about my business as quickly as I could. I had many chores to do when I got back. Unfortunately, my short trip turned into a longer one, when unexpectedly, the same herald who stood in that very market square 10 days before rode in on the very same horse as he did before. Everyone's attention was seized, and all heads turned in the same direction. He only briefly got off his horse to nail a piece of parchment to the post, where the invitation to the ball still hung. Without saying a word, he climbed back onto his steed and sped off down the road, his green coat flapping behind him. The swarm of people around the post grew very quickly, as everyone craned their necks to see what the parchment held. It was only after a minute or two did everyone realize that none of them could read, and a call went out around the group to ask if anyone was literate. I knew I should get back home, but I could not resist the call to read something, no matter how much I needed to get home and get the soup cooking. I replied that I could read, and found myself being pushed to the front of the crowd, people parting to let me past, eager to know what the message was. I stared at the paper and began to read out loud, and it took me completely by surprise. A proclamation from Lord Christopher to be distributed over his father's lands. I seek to find the maiden who so entranced me at the ball, held in my honor on the 16th of this month. The maiden in question left no name, and wore a golden dress with matching golden slippers. One of these slippers is now in my possession, and I will be making a tour of my father's lands to find the maiden whose foot fits this particular slipper. When I have found her, if she is willing, the offer of my hand will be made. Any assistance in helping myself find this maiden shall be rewarded. Signed, Lord Christopher Howards. The first and only thing I could think of was Ella. Someone had to tell Ella. She was the golden maiden that Lord Christopher was speaking of, and she needed to be told. I turned around and made my way through the crowd as fast as I could. I practically ran back home. Ran as fast as I could, carrying a basket full of food. It was more of a fast walk. When I got home, I shouted for Daniel, who was outside entertaining my siblings until I got back. I told him I would be back soon, but had to go and do something very important. I placed the basket on the table and walked back out of the door instantly. I had walked up the path to the manor many times before, but never with such haste. I knew Ella lived in the servants' quarters now, so would answer the back door if I knocked there. This was her chance to escape her step-family, only if she was willing to marry him, of course. I was not going to tell her she had to marry him. That would be her choice. As I walked up the path, the familiar front of the manor became visible, but now it looked slightly less neat. There were a few weeds growing in the grass in front of the house, and some of the windows looked dirty. But to be honest, I was more shocked about how good a state it was in, considering there was only Ella attending to everything. I just about managed to stay on top of our very small cottage, with its 4 rooms and moderate garden. As someone who used to work there, I knew how hard it was to keep everything in that house clean. I turned the corner, and was surprised to see no washing on the line. At the rate that Lady Anna wore dresses, there should have been many, many garments there. I pushed it to the back of my mind. My fist lifted, and I knocked at the door. There was no response. The moments passed, and after a minute or so, I tried again. There was still no response. I was about to turn away and try the front door, when I heard some scuffling coming from inside. At last, I thought. The door opened, and it was not Ella who stood there, but Lady Jacqueline. Her dress was stained with flour and what looked like egg, and her hair was a little untidy. I tried to disguise my shock, but my mouth fell agape before I could stop it. "Jacqueline?" I gasped. "Hello, Marion," she said quietly. "Where's Ella?" I asked. There was a moment of silence, and it looked like she was trying to form an answer. "She's busy," Jacqueline replied after a while. I wasn't stupid enough to believe her. Something was wrong. "Is she, really?" I asked. "Yes, she is," Jacqueline told me. "Is there something you wanted? I have things to do." "There was a proclamation just now, in the village," I told her, being sure not to give away that I knew who the proclamation was about. "The Duke's son wants to find the Golden Princess from last night. It says that she lost one of her slippers, and he is going to be searching for her with the hopes of marriage when he finds her." "Oh, I better tell Anna," Jacqueline replied, and tried to turn around, but I stopped her, asking, "Where's Ella?" "I told you, she's busy. I need to go." she said, closing the door behind her quickly, leaving me stunned. Something was going on here, but I couldn't do anything without breaking into the house and demanding to see Ella, and the ever-growing list of chores at home was starting to take over my thoughts. There was no rush. I could call around later when Ella was less occupied. The more I thought about it, I knew as soon as Lady Idiot up there found out about the proclamation, the entire house would be reverberating with the news, echoing her loud, shrill voice. Ella would no doubt hear the news. But still, I made a note in my head to call around tomorrow and check to see if Ella was all right. I did not think Jacqueline was telling the truth, but I did not want to incur the wrath of Lady Evil. So I turned around and began to walk back home down the path. The next day, I walked down the path to the manor house again, and once again was greeted by Lady Jacqueline at the back door. This disturbed me more the second time. This meant there was definitely something off with Ella. Jacqueline looked even more tired than the day before, and her dress more dirty. So this time, I barged past Jacqueline into the kitchen. "Where is Ella? What has happened to her?" I demanded. "Please keep your voice down," Jacqueline whispered urgently. "Why? What happens if I don't?" I said, purposely a little louder. "Shh," she begged. "I'll tell you. Just be quiet." I turned around a chair at the kitchen table and sat down, facing Jacqueline. She glanced nervously at the stairs leading to the main house and started to talk. "Ella was not allowed to come to the ball. Mother wouldn't let her. But she didn't tell her. She let her believe she would be allowed to go if she finished her tasks. And so she did. But when Ella came downstairs in her lovely white gown, Mother forbade her from coming, saying that she did not deserve to go. Mother said ragged servant girls had no place mixing with well-bred people and ruining their night. So..." She took a deep breath. "Mother and Anna tore her dress while she was still wearing it. It was horrible. I dared not interfere, and Ella was heartbroken. Mother then walked to the carriage, and Anna dragged me along too." She stopped talking. "Go on," I said. "Shh, someone's coming," she said, and then I heard it, footsteps. "You have to go, now," she told me, and ran to open the door. I followed her, not really wanting to get caught up by her ladyship. I was practically out the door when I turned around. "Just tell me, is she all right?" I asked her. Jacqueline hesitated, and then nodded slightly. "She will be, once the Duke's son has been." That did not particularly quell my fears about Ella's well-being, but before I could ask what she meant, she had shut the door on me. I raised my fist to knock at the door, but there were voices on the other side, voices that sounded a lot like Lady Kingston and Lady Anna. So I decided not to make a sound. If Jacqueline said Ella was going to be all right, I would have to believe her. I had more chores to complete, and besides, if village rumors were to be believed, Lord Christopher and his men were due to arrive tomorrow. If she could just hold on till tomorrow, I hoped everything would turn out for the best. I had to hope. I couldn't do much more for Ella. I would have to pray that Lord Christopher found his way to her, find her with her golden slipper.